Well, there was a time when there used to be a long list for that justification, but debate after debate after debate has shot down so many of those. I think all that's left now is that it's the wrong message to send to our children, because these drugs are still dangerous and we don't want our kids using them. We don't want them to think that it's okay to use them. And the only other thing that I hear now is that, we'll have so many people driving vehicles stoned. We already have a big problem with alcohol and DUI. Now we're going to have so many more people driving under the influence of drugs.
Nah, but that's
it.
I think, I'm not sure, but I think it was Portugal that decriminalized the use of marijuana. And this was one of the arguments made before they did it. Mm-hmm. And everybody's going to be running around and they're going to they made all drugs, or I think, I don't remember if it was just marijuana or marijuana and other drugs, but they basically made it no longer illegal. And they have not had that exact thing happen. They have specifically not had an increase in the amount of drug use or people driving stoned or whatever else. It hasn't happened. So don't the proponents of these, what I consider to be fear-mongering tactics, do they have any kind of response to what's happened in Portugal?
No, not really. Portugal has done great things. 11 years ago, they decriminalized the possession, personal amounts of all drugs, not just marijuana.
What's all drugs?
And for our for all drugs. And for our teenage population, or school-age children, high schoolers in Portugal, drug use has gone down between 22 and 25%. Overall. Now, drug use went up for the adult population just a little bit, but we don't have the drug driving, as you mentioned before. When you talk to the police over there in Portugal, they are so thrilled about what has happened because they're now able to focus more on those crimes of violence, crimes, robbery, domestic violence, murder, rapes. And the relationships between police and citizens in Portugal has improved. Treatment has improved and gone up. It just, everyone that you talk to over there is just thrilled about what's happening.
And I would imagine part of it is that when something is made illegal, go back to alcohol, then you have people who are promoting its use to others. Who, hey, listen, I can get you some alcohol or something. I can get you this forbidden fruit, whether it's pot or cocaine or whatever it is. When it's no longer illegal, those people who are promoting it, their impetus is kind of taken out from under them. And so I would imagine the youth are not getting as bombarded. But, hey, man, I can get you some pot here and everything. What's the big deal? It's legal. So there's not as much pressure, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's just the whole attitude changes towards these drugs, and therefore they don't have the issues that we currently have over here. Such as, think about this: overdose deaths in Portugal. We're talking about lives here. Has been reduced by 52%, right, since they implemented this. 52%. And new cases of AIDS for intravenous drug users has declined by 71%.
Wow.
Imagine those numbers here in the United States. You know how many lives that we would save?
Quite a lot.
Mind-boggling.
Mind-boggling. You and I are talking sanity in what seems like an insane asylum right now, because in my mind, and I'm sure this is a no-brainer for you, but wouldn't it be more effective to prosecute criminals as people who rob or kill or otherwise commit crimes in pursuit of drugs than to go after those who simply use drugs? After all, if I smoke pot or snort cocaine, aren't I the only person I am potentially harming? And don't I have a right to take actions that might harm me?
Absolutely. That's our argument. Yes, and we use the term victimless crime because you cannot be a victim to yourself. So this is what most of the police on the street want to see. They want to be able to stop pursuing these people who are using drugs and harming themselves, potentially harming themselves, because just because you use these drugs doesn't mean you're harming yourself, okay? Potentially. But they want to focus more on those violent crimes. They want to get back to dealing with those crimes of people hurting our children and finding our lost children. You know, they don't want to waste time in these other areas, but they're pressured to do that from management and from City Hall and from the state capitals. That's a problem.
Well, you know, I hate to be simplistic, but can't they just get together and say, we're not going to do this anymore? You know, this is counterproductive. We're not going to do this.
Yeah, it's easier said than done in the law enforcement world, because you have to understand, first of all, someone has to take the lead and do that. And whoever that is, you know, if they ever had any aspirations of being promoted, if they ever had aspirations of having a better position or better job, you can forget about it. The politics within law enforcement is very real and very dangerous. And don't get me wrong, there are still a lot of police officers that don't get it. You know, they don't have the information. You know, they don't have the information that many of us do have. Like, even for me, it wasn't an overnight 180-degree turn. You know, it took a little bit of time. You know, it took more information coming day after day after day. And that's what it takes with someone who's been doing this for years and decades in some cases to understand what's really going on.
We've heard stories, all of us, we've heard stories of SWAT teams literally murdering innocent people in pursuit of individuals accused of doing drugs. When you were with the forces, weren't narcotics agents then trained to be careful about harming innocents? And how has training changed? You used to train people. How has training changed over the decades to allow for military invasions of private property, but innocents simply considered to be collateral damage?
Well, unfortunately, we have evolved to a place in law enforcement of taking the easy road. What do I mean by that? Back when I was working undercover, we looked at every individual case on its own merit. We got with the investigator, the guns. You know, are they known for violence? What do their criminal records say? Has there ever been any? Have you seen any? Or are they just a group of people who are making money selling drugs? And more times than not, it's just people making money selling drugs. There's no violence involved. Therefore, back then, we would have a couple of uniformed officers present so they know that it is the police coming to their door. But we would knock, you know, give a reasonable amount of time for them to open the door, and of course, if they didn't, then we would, you know, force the door open and go in. But I have to give you this one example. One search point that we served. Are you familiar with the mayor in Hyattsville whose dog was shot? Labrador Retrievers doing a search service.
I'm not sure familiar with that one, but I've heard a lot of stories like that.
Well, just about a couple of miles from where that case recently took place, and they hit the wrong house then. When I was working undercover, we served a search warrant in Hyattsville, Maryland. And when we went to the door, me and a fellow officer went through the back door. It was one of the biggest Great Danes staring right at us that we had ever seen. But we paused for a moment, realized that the dog was not aggressive, and we went about our business, search went around the dog and continued to look for the people at home. But today, it seems like if there's a dog on the premise, you shoot the dog. You know, we've had war veterans killed. We've had a grandmother killed. We had a young girl shot accidentally when a SWAT team came through the door through the tight entrance.
Yes,
a little child. You know, that's because we have evolved to a place where we use a SWAT team for every search warrant because we don't take the time to do due diligence, to do the evaluation, to make the determination whether or not we need this level of violence in serving this search warrant, because that's what it is. And we've just, it seems like that occurred after we started going through the 80s, you know, with this so-called crack epidemic. But then we started to get our hands on surplus Army equipment. There were dollars available to buy all this equipment. And once you buy it, you feel like you have to use it. And so there's this blanket policy now throughout the country that says for every search warrant we serve, no matter what we're serving it for, we're going to use a SWAT team. Makes no sense whatsoever.
And frequently there's not a search warrant behind these break-ins. But there are those who would suggest that it's not so much an evolution as an intent to put fear of government in the hearts and minds of the people. Do you think there's anything to that?
I don't know if, I can't really say if that's the intent, but I can definitely say that that is the result. I just think that there have been decisions made within the law enforcement community that weren't properly evaluated and continue to go unchecked. So I can't say if that was the intent. It might be, it may not be, but it's definitely the result. We are putting the fear in people unwarrantedly.
Do SWAT team members and narcotics guilty of murdering innocents ever get prosecuted for their crimes, and do you believe they should be?
If they are operating according to the policies that are set forth, you know, and that's how they, you know, that's how they have to operate, then I don't think they should be prosecuted, because if it's an accident, and they're operating according to policy, according to how they were trained, you got to realize the people, they're trained to do this.
But isn't that
the training is pretty intense.
Isn't that tantamount to
there's
saying,
a lot of cases.
Well, now let me interrupt you, Major, because we're almost out of time. Isn't that tantamount to saying I'm only following orders?
No, I don't think so. When you have a SWAT team here, okay, when you decide to go into a premise and make that dynamic entry, yes, they have to evaluate things properly and make decisions as they're going about doing this. But I think that as long as they are serving that search warrant in a reasonable manner according to the situation that's there, with no malice intent, you know, with no gross negligence, then that is their job. You know, and you can't, and believe me, when you're in the middle of these things, when you're doing these things, you do have to follow the order of your team leader. Because if you hesitate for a moment and there is danger, someone's going to die. And you're trained to do things like clockwork. And it has to be like clockwork. The problem comes when a decision is made to use a dynamic entry in a SWAT team in a circumstance when it was not needed.
Like
that's what you should attack.
Yeah, like an old student loan. Yeah.
Right, that's what you should attack, the decision to use the team in the first place.
But who's held responsible when that happens? That's what frustrates so many of us.
It should be the hierarchy. It should be the team leader. It should be, usually you have a sergeant leading a team or a lieutenant. Those are the people who should be held responsible. Anyone in that command decision-making process is held responsible. Once the team is given the order to go ahead and make the dynamic entry and clear the home like they're trained to do, you know, unless during that process there's gross negligence, you know, other than that, that team should not be held responsible. It's the people who make the decisions to send them in that should be first held responsible.
My guest has been Major Neill Franklin. The organization is LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, www.leap.org. leap, L-E-A-P, .cc, leap.cc. Mr. Franklin, thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's been quite enlightening, and I've really appreciated your candor during the conversation.
Brent, thanks for having me. I really look forward to it. Thank you so much.
I hope to see you again on the air. Thanks so much.